So we are going to move into the second presentation, and this is a really, really critical aspect of all of this, of course, as we see our world getting scarier to live in. Of course, you know, we're seeing signs of global warming everywhere. It's pretty apparent that we're not going to change this thing by relying on governments or industry, right? It's got to be a grassroots effort, and this is a way that we can actually make a change and turn this thing around. So we're so glad, so privileged and honored to have Mohan Gurunathan. He is an engineer, an entrepreneur, and activist who has lived and worked in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. He's a popular Bay Area speaker on the topic of environmental impact of our individual diet choices. Mohan played a leading role in the city of Mountain View to include plant-based diet promotion as part of their 2019 environmental sustainability plan. He also serves as an advisor and board member for numerous environmental and animal advocacy nonprofits. Mohan earned his bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from M.I.T. and runs a small engineering consulting business. We're so glad that he is on our side and on the animals' side. Please welcome Mohan Gurunathan.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Hope. Actually, I'm the one who's honored to be here because Hope is one of my longtime heroes, and she is extremely important to the animal protection and the environmental movements. She's one of the founders and pioneers in this area, so when she called me, there was no way I could say no. Before I start speaking, I like to get to know my audience a little bit, so I'm going to ask you a few questions. So the first question, how many of you consider yourselves environmental advocates? Okay, great. How many of you consider yourselves animal advocates? Okay. How many of you like to sing in the shower? About 50%, okay. How many are you vegan? Okay. No judgment if you're not, by the way. In fact, it would be better if you're not vegan because you probably know the rest. You probably know the rest of what I'm going to say, but. How many of you wear socks to bed? Okay. Unrelated, but I'm just gathering statistics on various things. My daughter wears socks to bed, and I never knew anybody did that before, so I'm trying to find out how prevalent that is. Okay. All right, I think I understand my audience a little bit better, so let's move on to the talk now. When we talk about why do we want to change people in terms of what they eat or what they consume in general, there are three big issues that typically come up. The first one is the well-being of the environment, because obviously what we eat and what we consume in general has major repercussions on our environment and the future of the world for our children and their children. The second big issue is farm animal well-being. And farm animal well-being is what brought many of us into this movement, because when we first discovered the way animals are raised, the way they are treated, the way they are killed, that drove a sense of outrage for many of us. And that's what made us animal advocates. And that is more powerful in some ways because it becomes an ethical and a moral issue rather than just an issue of external factors. This relates to what our values are and what society's values are. And the third major issue is human well-being. And this extends not to just diseases like heart disease and diabetes and cancer, but also to social justice issues like poverty and world hunger, and also public health issues like pandemics and antibiotic-resistant diseases. So these are kind of what we call the big three reasons that we want to persuade people to change what they eat, what they consume in general. In this talk, I'm going to be focusing only on the environmental well-being, partly because that's what Hope asked me to do, but secondly because when we try to persuade people, sometimes it works to talk about farm animal well-being, but oftentimes people are not willing to look at that because it is too horrible and it's too uncomfortable to look at the farm animal issues directly. And the cognitive dissonance that people have around their actions and what they see happening on farms is sometimes too strong, so they're unwilling to look at it. So talking about the environment sometimes opens a door to the conversation, and it gets people to start considering these issues. And once they're open to that, they are oftentimes open to considering the other two issues as well. So now I want to talk about 3 myths and misconceptions that are common in society. The first is that climate change is our only problem. And if you turn on the radio or the TV, all they're talking about environmentally is the climate crisis. You rarely hear about other issues, but the fact is there are a multitude of other major issues that we need to solve to ensure the survival of our civilization. The second one is, of these multitude of issues, that climate change is our biggest problem. In fact, by the assessment that I'm going to share with you in a little bit, climate change is not our most extreme problem. We have several problems that are objectively in worse condition than climate change. And the third is that clean energy will fix everything. And again, when we talk about solutions, when we hear solutions, even from our governments and leading scientists, it's all about renewables, solar, wind, getting rid of fossil fuels. Those are all things we need to do, absolutely, but they're not going to fix everything because we're ignoring a huge number of problems. So to explain to you what all these problems are, I'm going to talk about something called the planetary boundary study. Are any of you familiar with this? Okay, a few up here, but this is something I wish more people knew about because it's really critical to understand the future of our planet. So the planetary boundary study is, it's kind of a living study that's been ongoing for the last 15 years, and it was conducted in Sweden by a group of scientists. And what they set out to answer the question, what are the critical systems on Earth that we need to protect to ensure a survivable future for us and for all life forms? And they came up with 9 different systems. So if we consider, we can also think of this as 9 existential threats that we have on our planet, okay? And if we think of this 9 fires burning, we need to put all 9 fires out. Climate change is just one of the 9 fires. So what are the other ones? So I'll show you the framework that they came up with. So we're going to start with climate change. The second one is biodiversity. We need to ensure that a robust biodiversity on the planet. The third is deforestation. We need to ensure a large amount of forest cover on the planet. The fourth is fresh water. Fifth is organic pollution. Sixth is ocean acidification. Seventh is atmospheric aerosols, which is like particulate pollution. The eighth is the ozone layer. And the ninth is chemical pollution, which includes the plastic pollution crisis. So these are 9 issues that we need to solve, basically, to ensure survival of the planet. Now, they also assessed what they call a safe operating space, and these are defined in terms of quantitative numbers. I'm not showing you the numbers, but I'm just going to show you their qualitative assessment. And they turn this into a kind of a radar plot. And anything that stays inside the circle means that we're in the safe zone. Anything that goes outside the circle means we're in the danger zone. So let me show you where their assessment is as of 2023. So of the 9 issues, you see 6 of them are outside of the safe zone, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's interesting is though climate change is outside of the safe zone, but you can see there are several issues that they've assessed as being even more dangerous than climate change. And those are biodiversity, organic pollution, and chemical pollution. So how are we going to solve all of these issues simultaneously? It seems even worse than it was when we thought climate change was the only problem, right? Well, the first step to solving a problem is to understand what are the root causes. So let's talk about the root causes. Climate change, we know, is related to the burning of fossil fuels. And that is accurate. But what's not talked about as much is that it's related to agriculture as well. Agriculture is a major driver of climate change. Let's look at biodiversity. The leading cause of biodiversity loss is habitat loss. Habitat loss is largely driven by, by agriculture. The leading cause of deforestation happens to be agriculture. Leading cause of water use has to be agriculture. Biogeochemical flows, you see there's a P and an N, that's phosphorus and nitrogen. That's basically drainage runoff from farms. So again, agriculture. And what are the main causes of chemical pollution? Well, there are a lot of industries that contribute to that, but I would say both fossil fuels and agriculture are leading contributors to that. So if you look at this from a root cause point of view, what do all of our major problems have in common? Agriculture. It's not just cows. Cows are part of it, but it's a lot more than just cows. So if we're going to tackle one issue, really we should be looking at agriculture, but that is the issue that gets almost no airtime when we talk about how are we going to save this planet. And that's what we need to change. We need to change the problem that we're looking at because we're ignoring the elephant in the room. We're focusing on a worthy problem, which is climate change and fossil fuels, but it's not a holistic approach to solving the problem. So to drive this home, I just wanted to put it out there one more time. There's nothing humans do on this planet that affects it as much as agriculture. Not energy, not mining, not manufacturing, not any consumer products. There's nothing that compares to agriculture. And many of you know this, the single most powerful action you can do as an individual is to stop consuming meat and dairy and eggs and convince other people to do the same. So now I'm going to explain this in a little more detail. So I have a question for you. How many of you use solar energy? I see about 50%. Are you sure? It's a trick question. Did you know you all use solar energy? Do you know what I'm talking about? So solar energy, pretty much all life on Earth runs on solar energy, right? How does that solar energy get into our body? Well, now we can talk about the food chain, right? So the food chain, we're all familiar with this. This is drawn in what's called a trophic cascade or trophic pyramid, and it basically shows that all energy for life comes from the sun. That's captured by green plants on land and turned into chemical energy, which we know as food. That chemical energy is eaten by the first level of consumers. Those are eaten by second level of consumers up to the top of the chain. Everybody familiar with this, right? Now, why is this drawn in a pyramid shape rather than just like a ladder, boom, boom, boom? There's a specific reason for that. Does anybody know? Quantity? Well, that's part of it. So the triangle shape represents something in biology called the 10% law. Now, this part I want you to listen very carefully because if you understand the 10% law, that explains almost everything else in my presentation follows from this 10% law. And what the 10% law says is when you go from one level in the food chain to the next, and to the next, and to the next, only 10% of the food energy carries from one level to the next. And that seems kind of shocking, right? Why are we so inefficient? What happens to that extra 90%? Well, it turns out that is lost. It's lost in the animal's movement, its metabolism. About 50% of what animals eat is excreted as waste in terms of chemical energy. CO2 is a form of energy that's released, CH4, methane. So animals, if you think about it, you have to eat a certain amount just to keep your body running. You're not putting on weight, right? Just to maintain your constant weight, you have to eat a certain amount. And the only energy that gets passed to the next level is what turns into biomass, what turns into increasing your flesh. And that's only about 10% of what an animal eats, okay? So you can start to see how inefficient it is to move even just one level higher in the food chain. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's keep this in mind. This has profound implications to how we feed a planet of 8 billion people, okay? Let's imagine we have the 8 billion people on this earth that all became vegan. We have 8 billion herbivores. If I were to draw a trophic pyramid, just with respect to the humans, it would look like this. We have the 8 billion humans and the crops that we grow to feed them, okay? Now, if these humans all became carnivores, what would happen to this? Well, we have the same number of humans who are now eating animals, who are now eating crops. And we have that 90% loss at each stage, right? So what does this imply globally? This implies we need 10 times more farmland, crops, water, fertilizer, pesticides, but also the waste We have 10 times more waste, animal waste, right? Methane, CO2. We also start to need antibiotics. You don't really need antibiotics in a plant-based food system, but you do need them to treat billions of animals. So you can see in this diagram, this basically explains everything that I'm going to talk about from here on. When you go one step up the food chain, you multiply the resource usage and the waste by 10. Now that 10% rule is an approximation. It depends on a lot of different factors, and one of those is the type and the size of the animal. So for cows, it's worse than 10%, than 90% loss. For a cow, typically we feed it 25 units of plant protein. We get back 1 unit of edible protein. The rest turns into waste products. Okay, so that's a 96% loss. For pigs, we feed about 10 units, and we get back 1. So that's about the 90% loss. And for chickens, slightly more efficient, or I should say less inefficient, we feed about 4.5 units to get back 1 unit of protein, so about 78%. Now remember, everything that is not converted into edible protein is a waste product, right? So that's not just manure and feces, but it's carbon dioxide, it's methane, it's also many parts of the animal that we can't eat. In fact, about 50% of an animal carcass is inedible. So you can see this basic fact represented in the amount of land it takes to create different types of food. So in this particular graph, you can see everything below this line are plant-based foods. And this is to produce the same amount of protein from different foods. So I'll give you an example. Soybeans, to produce 100 grams of protein, you only need 1 square meter of land. But if you go up to beef, you need about 100 square meters of land. So it's 100 times more land to create the same amount of nutrition. How can we possibly be sustainable if people are eating beef all the time? Okay, now I want to take a slightly different path here, and I want you to imagine what the world looked like 1,000 years ago. Now, in the scale of the planet's age, that's a blink of an eye. But let's go in a time machine and see what would the planet look like if we went back 1,000 years and I dropped you on a continent somewhere or in the middle of the ocean. What would you likely see? Well, you would probably see trees. You'd probably see thriving biodiversity. You would see clean water sources. You would see vegetation everywhere you look. And you would see an ocean full of marine life. Now let's bring you back to the present. If I drop you on a continent somewhere, more than likely you would see this. Now you've all seen this from an airplane, but I'm not sure everybody appreciates how much of the planet we have converted into farms and pastures. So I have a video that I took, and it's really cool. You can go onto Google Earth, and you can shoot a little video as if you're flying across the land. And I want you to take a look at what the American Midwest looks like. Where are the forests? So from an airplane, we see little snapshots of this, but we don't see how continuous it is. And all of the land I'm showing you, about 90% of it was once forested. And all those forests have been torn down to make farms and pastures. And if you go into Europe or you go into Asia, you will see the same thing. So why on earth do we need so much land to feed people? Well, the reason is this. This is a graph where they've taken all the land that's been used for different purposes and they've aggregated it. And the biggest user of land in the United States is for cattle pasture. And one of the second biggest is for livestock feed and feed exports. And this is mostly, the feed and feed exports are mostly soybeans and corn for fattening cattle, but also chickens and pigs. Compare that to where we grow all the food that we eat domestically, much smaller area of land. We can feed humans on a very small amount of land if we just eat the plants directly. If we look at a world scale, the same analysis has been done by Our World in Data. And you can see this red area here represents all the land that we use to grow food to feed farm animals. And that's both feed crops and pasture land. And compare that to the remaining forests on Earth, which is slightly less than the amount of land that we use to feed animals. And we need forests. We need forests to fight climate change. And the land we use for edible crops is a fraction. This is all of our food, vegetables, and grains, and legumes, and fruits is only 7% of the Earth's land. To give you another data point for reference, do you see this purple area here? That represents all human cities, towns, developments, roads. All human structures, all human development is only 1% of the Earth's land. 27 times that we're using to raise food for animals. Doesn't that seem insane? But what's even more incredible is this. How much nutrition do we get from those two portions of land? So from this 27% of the Earth's land, we only get 18% of our calories. And from the area where we grow all our fruits and vegetables, we get 82%. So we're already getting most of our nutrition from plant-based sources anyway. The 27% land area is a colossal waste. And that's land that should be returned to nature. And similarly, if we look at protein, which is another important macronutrient, we get most of our protein from eating plant foods already. Okay, I'm going to switch tact again, and I want to ask you a question. Does anybody know how many animals are slaughtered annually worldwide? 80 billion? Okay. I expected you guys to know that. It's with the number of vegans we have here. Yeah, usually people don't know, most of the audiences I talk to. So 80 billion, 10 times the number of people that we have on Earth. That does not include fish. No. So fish. Trillions, all right, 1 to 3 trillion. Part of the reason I'm giving you these numbers is because as advocates for the environment and for animals, we need to have these numbers in our brain. We need to know them. We need to be able to discuss them with people credibly, logically, rationally. And so to be effective advocates, it's really good to know this information. Okay. So you probably already know, for many, many reasons, animal agriculture is the most destructive industry on Earth, many of them tying back to that 10% law. And we're going to talk about some of those. So again, we're focusing on the environment here. How do livestock actually cause climate change? Like when we think about climate change, we think chimneys and smokestacks and cars, right? Animals don't have tailpipes. Well, they kind of do, but not in the way that we think, right? So how does raising farm animals cause climate change? You want to throw some ideas out there? Methane is a good one. Cow farts, right? Is that what you hear? And yeah, it's actually more burps than farts. What's the number one way that they cause? Land use. Deforestation. So we're constantly tearing down more and more forests, and the major cause of that is to expand agricultural land for animals. Okay, so that's the number one cause. The second is from methane. Certain types of animals, ruminants, which includes cows and goats and sheep, the way they digest food creates methane as a byproduct, and methane is a very powerful climate warming gas. Now, people joke about the cow farts, but we have 1.5 billion cows on Earth. And if they're all belching methane, that adds up to a lot of methane. Also, all the manure that these animals create, as it sits around and decomposes, that off gases and it creates greenhouse gases. Okay? And the fourth is all the excess fertilizer we need to fertilize the land, and that also emits greenhouse gases. And the fifth is when you're dealing with so many animals, there's a lot of energy to transport them and to take them to slaughter and to refrigerate the meat. And if you add up all of that, that is a major contributor. And that energy largely comes from conventional fuels. So these are the 5 ways that raising animals contributes to climate change. We will get to that one. But that's definitely relevant. So how do we put this in comparison to other sources of emissions that we're more familiar with? So there's a range of numbers that are given for how responsible is animal agriculture for climate change. And that range starts from 16.5% and it goes up to 28. There's even a number estimate out there that's in the 80% from Dr. Sailesh Rao. I'm not quite convinced that that one is credible yet, so I'm not citing that here. But I think the range is anywhere 16.5 to 28, depending how you do the calculation. So up to almost a third of all climate change, it can be said to be caused by raising animals for food. What we can say is definitively that is more than all of the emissions from all forms of transportation on Earth. Okay, so if we take all the cars and planes and buses and trucks, et cetera, animal agriculture emits more than that because that's only about 14%, the transportation. Okay. So in your advocacy work, you can, a common strategy, because the number is not so certain, is to just say it is more than all the emissions of transportation. Okay. What we do know, that where the 28% number comes from, is if we rewild all the areas that are currently being used to raise animals. So if we went vegan as a global society, we would free up a whole bunch of land that we're currently using either as pasture or to grow feed crops. And all of that could be returned to its native condition, which is largely forests. Forests store an enormous amount of carbon. If you factor that in, that's where the 28% number comes in. So deforestation, animal agriculture is the leading cause of deforestation globally. About every second, we are losing about 1 to 2 acres of rainforest. And the leading cause is mainly for cattle, so we can graze more cattle. One of the main places this is happening is in the Amazon rainforest. So you've probably heard about the fires in the Amazon rainforest. You might wonder, in a wet rainforest, how does it catch fire? Well, that's because these are man-made. What people do is they cut down the trees, they let them dry out, and then they burn it to create fields, to graze cattle, and to grow soybeans for cattle. When we destroy habitats and rainforests, we create mass extinction. So animal agriculture is the main cause of the ongoing mass extinction. We're losing about 100 species a day. We haven't seen extinction rates like this since the asteroid that came and killed the dinosaurs. But this time it's our diet that's the asteroid. In fact, if you took all the mammals that are on Earth today and you sorted them by species, and you put the different species on a scale, this is what you'd find today. You'd find 36% of the weight of mammals on Earth is humans. 60% are cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. The remaining 4% is, what do you think? Wild animals. All the wild animals, the bears, and the lions, and the giraffes, and the rhinos, and the hippos, they all fit into that 4% slice. So more than anything, I think this graph shows how our farm animals' addiction is squeezing nature into oblivion. So now we get to water usage, the question that was asked before. So meat and dairy industries use 1/3 of the Earth's fresh water, and it's not because the animals are so thirsty. It's to grow their food. Now, here in California, when we had a drought, what were they telling us to do? Take shorter showers, right? Don't water your lawn. Go to drought-tolerant irrigation. But if you look at where is most of the water in the United States used, it is used for animal agriculture, 55%. Domestic water use is only 5% of our water use, and that includes all your showers, and your landscaping, and washing your clothes. So continue to shower as much as you want, just change your diet. Nobody ever talks about that. And then remember, the waste gets multiplied by approximately 10. So we have an enormous crisis of animal waste that nobody's talking about in this country. Farm animals in the United States produce about 20 times as much sewage as the human population. And where does this go? When you and I flush the toilet, there are very strict laws on what happens to that. It goes into a sewer, it goes to a sewage treatment plant, it gets filtered and screened and sanitized before it's discharged back to the environment. What about the 20 times more pollution from animals? None of that is mandated. It sits in football field-sized cesspools that evaporate. And then when those cesspools get full, they spray the sludge onto farm fields. And what happens? Eventually that runs into our groundwater and our streams and our lakes and our rivers. And eventually it makes its way to the ocean. So every dot on here is what's called the dead zone. And they're all at the mouths of rivers. And so this is where all of that sewage and fertilizer runoff makes its way out to the ocean. And when it gets to the ocean, it causes algal blooms because the water is too nutrient rich. And when algae blooms, it eats up all the oxygen, and you get a dead zone where marine life can't live. And this is a recent phenomenon. 200 years ago, we didn't have ocean dead zones. This is primarily because of animal agriculture. Now, I have one slide on the fishing industry, but that doesn't really do it justice because the oceans are in absolutely terrible shape. And it is because of industrial fishing. It's because of our demand for fish. We've basically decimated about 90% of large marine species, and we're headed to decimate almost 100% in the next 30 years if we continue at this rate. I'll give you just a couple troubling facts about this industry. About 40% of what we catch is not even intended catch, it's bycatch. That means it wasn't the species we were going after. And what happens, they just get killed and thrown back into the ocean, dead and dying. About 1/3 of the fish that we catch is used to feed chickens, pigs, and cattle. So again, a huge amount of inefficiency where, if you look at the 90% loss at each level of the food chain. Chickens, pigs, and cows were not meant to eat fish. So the idea, if you go to Whole Foods or you go to other places and you see these signs that say sustainable seafood, don't buy it. It is a complete myth. Sustainable seafood is not even possible given the demand that we have for fish. The ocean cannot replenish life as fast as we're taking it out. And here we get to what Hope was talking about before. Now you go to Whole Foods, you go to other supermarkets, and you see all these wonderful labels that make you feel just great about life, right? They just make you feel warm and fuzzy, just like you're doing a good thing by buying this regeneratively grazed beef. And the simple truth is they're not worth the paper they're printed on. I mean, it would take a presentation to really refute each one of these, but what I can tell you is from an environmental point of view, they're absolutely not meaningful. In some ways, they're worse for the environment. And I'll explain why in the next couple slides. Okay. So this is meat industry greenwashing. So let's look at one, the organic label. What does it really mean? So organic means that they don't use, the feed is GMO-free and pesticide and chemical-free. The animals are not fed antibiotics or animal byproducts, which is very common for non-organic meat products. The animals must have some outdoor access, but that some is not defined. So they could be given, half an hour of opportunity to go outside of a crowded barn, and that constitutes some. But it does not mean cruelty-free. So organic does not mean cruelty-free because they can still do things like debeaking and castration without painkillers, dehorning. All of those abuses that are conventional in other animal farms are still allowed. What about the environmental impact? Well, we know it's not. The studies have shown the climate cost and the environmental cost are no better than they are on non-organic farms. And in some cases, they are worse. Why is that? Because to raise organic or to grow organic food, you need more land because the yields are less if you're not using chemicals. When you need more land, you're taking away more forest, more wild habitat, right? So in some ways, organic is worse for the environment. And there's this trend for grass-fed. Is grass-fed really any better? So grass-fed is, first of all, it's only a very small percentage of US beef is grass-fed. But if you look at the data, grass-fed cattle put on weight more slowly. They take about 6 months longer. While they're doing that, they're belching methane for an additional 6 months. And digesting grass actually creates more methane. So it turns out grass-fed are worse for the climate. And they take more water, more land. So in every way, they are worse for the climate. They may have slightly better lives than feedlot cattle, but certainly from an environmental point of view, they're not any better. So I think I'm running up against time. I think that's pretty much all the points I wanted to make in this. I have 5 more minutes? Okay. So yeah, I'll use those for Q&A. The basic message I want to leave you with is really the future of our world depends on what we choose to eat. And this is a message we as advocates need to get out there. We need to raise awareness and make other people realize how important this issue is of what we individually choose to eat.